The following segment is sponsored by Gilman and Bedigian.
Well, with another mass school shooting, politicians argue gun policy changes and their effectiveness, while others turn to the court system and file lawsuits against the gun manufacturers and those school systems. Well, joining us now to help break down the laws and the lawsuits' effect, attorney Charles Gilman with Gilman and Bedigian. And Charles, how are you doing this morning?
I'm well, Tom. How are you?
I'm doing great. When we started talking about this, after a mass shooting, you start seeing it right away coming out of Washington, both sides debating on what will be the effectiveness or the effective law that they can write up or some type of policy change. However, another group of people are saying, you know what, we need to go after the gun manufacturers, and why didn't the school protect our children? So if there's lawsuits coming out, how effective are they?
Well, Tom, it depends on the state that they're coming from and the laws of that state. And, you know, the federal government can also do something because they can create legislation that holds the gun manufacturers liable. That is a double-edged sword. You know, you want to have guns for valid purposes like law enforcement. So, you know, obviously, one of the fundamentals of a trial, points that a trial lawyer always tries to impart on people, is that one of the things that lawsuits do is they cause people to react differently because of the punishment. And the only punishment we can give somebody civilly is to cause them to pay money. So for example, and just by way of example, if we were to take a gun manufacturer and be able to hold them liable for a school shooting without getting behind the policy of all that, but if we could do it hypothetically and the jury comes back and gives a large enough award, we've punished that gun manufacturer as trial lawyers and unfortunately the victims as plaintiffs, but perhaps it prevents them from manufacturing more guns when they can't afford to because they have to pay the verdict. So that's one of the ways that, you know, trial lawyers and laws can help prevent these things from happening in the future.
Charles, is there any way, though, that if that happens in one state, and say there's another state where there wasn't a similar situation, but parents are concerned, well, that my school's not protecting my child enough, could they file a lawsuit beforehand to kind of change the way that their school approaches the safety? I think there's going to be a very interesting dynamic that happens. I think that's a twofold question. Number one, they're stuck with the legislation in their state, so they wouldn't be able to file a lawsuit preemptively. They'd have to lobby their politicians to change the law, and then they could file the lawsuit. The other thing that I think is going to happen is school shootings, unfortunately, God forbid, are becoming more and more common. So the analogy I would use is, you know, just like a landlord has the responsibility to put salt down and take care of an icy sidewalk, schools are going to start to get into the position where school shootings are unfortunately, very unfortunately, foreseeable. So they're going to have a duty to protect the students, arguably. So it's really waiting on lawmakers then to find out exactly what happens there before these lawsuits can go forward.
Correct. And like there's some examples in New York where there's an interesting new law that was passed in 2021, and victims of the subway attack are using that law to go after the gun manufacturer in that case, which was Glock.
All right, Charles Gilman with Gilman and Bedigian, thank you so much for your expertise.
Thank you, Tom.
Sure.